Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 157. Today we are talking how you can finance a property development. We're going to answer a question that I get asked almost daily on the phone from property investors mostly. They don't understand the difference between property developing and property investing when it comes to finance. So you're going to learn quite a bit in this podcast. Jump on in, episode 157. Hello, episode 157 and welcome. Great that you've joined us. I don't know what order you're listening to this one, but today's the 10th of July, which means yesterday was...
Your birthday.
Yesterday was my birthday. How good was that? Great day.
Great day.
I got some new golf clubs.
Thanks to
Thanks to Bob. And
had a swing as well?
Yeah, I did. Had a game, had a lesson, which I needed more than the game, trust me.
And you had a speaking engagement last night on your birthday.
I did, but I still went anyway. And they sang happy birthday to me, actually.
100 women singing happy birthday.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, it was very lovely. But that's enough about birthdays.
Mm-hmm. I've moved on because it was your birthday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm having birthday week though, Bob.
Of course.
Yes. Alrighty. We need to give the book away. And this week, the book, which I don't even have a copy here to wave, so I'll just wave 3 ones in, but it's not this book. It's actually Property Millionaires Exposed, goes to Alexis James. I spoke to Alexis this week and I said, you're our book winner this week. Bit of a go-getter. Wow. So you'll receive that in the post in the next day or 5 probably by the time it gets posted out, hopefully tomorrow. And yeah, it'll be in the post to you. So today we are talking how you can finance a property development because it's one of those things that people get very confused about.
I hear you on the phone talking so much to people about that.
People say, I don't have any serviceability. I'm like, well, you don't need any serviceability. And they have this whole, what? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you don't have to.
No, you don't. So, well, Bob, and finance is your thing. You are very good at finance. That's kind of how you roll.
It's pretty important in property development, eh?
Yeah, but I think it's also the thing you love. You understand the intricacies of it.
Yeah, well, it comes in many shapes and forms, and you can often structure it to suit the deal.
Yeah. So I'm going to get you to answer the question. We do a live Q&A, and this question came in for our live Q&A. And so for anyone who's in our Property Accelerator or has purchased our online course, the bundle, we have this live Q&A every couple of weeks. And this was a question that was in there. And you answered it, and I thought, oh my goodness, that would be such a great podcast question to answer because we get it asked it all the time. So it was this. I have sufficient equity to develop a duplex. So it doesn't matter. You could have sufficient equity to develop anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So I have a lot of equity, but my serviceability is limited. How can I buy a site? Okay, Bob, unfold your magic on that one.
Well, I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with property development, in other words, they haven't done one previously, maybe haven't done a course, understand finance. They think finance is the same as when they bought their house. You know, they got a loan on their house, they got a loan on an investment property. And of course, a big component of that, well, there's 2 things. One is a deposit and the other thing is serviceability. So you have to prove that you can repay the loan.
Yeah.
That's why the financier asks you for things like pay slips or BAS statements or whatever. And that's what most people are familiar with. So they think automatically, well, if I borrow money from a financier, I've got to prove I can pay the interest. And so with a lot of people, they might have a pretty solid house loan, or they might have some investment properties. And what we often find with people with investment properties is they're what we call tapped out. You often find that with people.
Yeah. And mostly that's often why they end up ringing me because they've probably bought 1, 2, 3, 4, and up to 7 or 8, it can be anything, investments. And then they realise that they can't buy anymore because they've extended all of their credit. They've extracted all of their equity. They can no longer service by the time, all those figures are done by their sort of big 4 bank. They can no longer service, look after, or
They can't buy any more properties.
and they become, I call it hamstring. They hamstring themselves, and they have to wait for one of a few things. They either have to wait for properties to go up again, which it does, but there are cycles, and that's going to be slow. So because they're already excited about making money, they don't like that. Or they have to wait for.
Well, then there's the income side.
Yes.
So you got to, as you say, you got to build up equity, but then you still got to service it. So they're waiting for their rents on their rental properties to go up. Maybe their salary's going to go up.
And they often say that as well. So I've gone as far as I can. They've mapped that out. They usually know how much more they could earn, and they know that there's going to be no big jumps anytime soon. So that's where they get to. And so they get to this point where, okay, I want to do property developing then, because they hear about us, they listen to the podcast and think, hang on a sec, so we can do property development. And that's kind of where I step in and have a conversation and say, well, it's kind of not like property investing.
No, it's not. And a lot of that, I use the term tapped out, meaning they can't borrow any more money. They're
I use hamstrung.
Fully serviced. Yeah. A lot of that happened also. Remember last year when we had so many interest rate increases? It was like 13 incremental increases. So people are, happily financing along at 2.5% interest. Now they're on 6.5% or whatever. And so that squeezed a lot of people as well. And people that had some spare capacity, that capacity disappeared.
Yes.
Because when you do the calculations at 6.5%, or even if you had a buffer on, even if you got a 2% buffer, then they're calculating at 8.5%, whereas previously it was a lot less.
Yeah.
And people that had some spare capacity, that capacity disappeared. And so lots of people are tapped out, as we say, or as I say.
Yeah.
And finance, so they think, well, I'd love to do property development, but I'm all tapped out. Then they say, well, do I have to sell some investment properties? Do I have to sell my house?
And you know what, though? I'd also sometimes think that that's not a bad option for some people. We're going to talk about other options shortly, but sometimes you might have had, and we had this conversation with members in our family circle, where they've had increases in property, and you look at the percentage they've had, and then you stand back and say it's going to take X amount of years for any more growth. You'd get more growth using that money to do something else. And so sometimes that is an option for people, isn't it, Bob?
Yeah.
Did that make sense how I said it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I really suggest people sell their principal place of residence, because all that's going to happen, you've got to live somewhere. So then you're going to go and rent. So sure, you get some cash, but then your serviceability hasn't improved at all, because now whether you're paying a mortgage or whether you're renting, it affects your serviceability. So, and what we often find with people is it's one or the other. Some people are short on equity and might have a good income. Some people might have plenty of equity, not a good income. Some people might have no equity and no income. Yeah. Well, some people have lots of equity and lots of income, but really the majority of people that we talk to, it's either one or the other. And I think serviceability is probably the one that has the biggest effect on people, because of what happened with interest rates as well. But really you need both. The bottom line is, if you're going to do a property development, you have to have equity and you have to be able to get the money. Yeah. But do you need serviceability?
Well, no. Bob, explain that one.
Okay, well, I'll keep it simple at first. Let's look at
and then you'll take it complicated. Cool.
I'll dig deeper.
Looking forward to the second half of this conversation.
Let me say I'll dig deeper.
Okay, let's start with the simple stuff first.
Simple stuff. Let's look at retail finance versus commercial finance.
Yep.
So retail finance, often called residential finance, it's the sort of finance that most people are familiar with. When you bought your house or when you buy an investment property, you might have gone to a bank. That would be a retail bank. You see them around Westfield, different places. And that's a normal loan. It could be an investment loan. It could be, your own home loan, but you have to have a deposit and you have to have serviceability. So that is a normal retail loan. A commercial loan is one we often use. Well, I'll talk about it in a minute when we can use it, but a commercial loan particularly we use at the construction stage of a project. And one of the big differences with commercial loans is that the interest is capitalised. So what that means is the financier works out the interest on the loan, because remember, if it's a development, let's say it's a 2-year loan. Well, they work out the interest over that 2 years and they make that part of the loan. So they actually lend you the interest. Because they lend you the interest, you haven't got to find it out of your back pocket every month like you do on a retail loan.
So you don't need.
So serviceability is
out.
not really the issue there at all. And what they do, that's called an interest cap or an interest capitalisation. And they just quarantine that amount of money. And every month when the interest is due on your commercial loan, they just take some of that interest cap. Whatever's due this month, they take it out of that interest allocation, which is sort of put to one side. And so that negates to a pretty big degree the requirement for serviceability. And so that's the difference. That's one of the main differences between a commercial and retail finance. The retail financiers, which we typically think of the banks, the big four, the second tier banks, they have a commercial division as well within the bank, but you won't find that commercial division at a local branch. They'll be in the city at the head office somewhere, and they do commercial finance. Commercial finance isn't just property development finance. If you're buying, an industrial unit or maybe some, a few strip shops or a little office or something, that's all commercial type finance, and they will lend money on that as an investment. But commercial finance also does incorporate property development finance. So the big difference, look, it costs a bit more. The interest rate's a bit higher than resi. The application fees are higher than resi, but it's the sort of money that you get for property development. And the big difference is the capitalised interest, because serviceability becomes a bit of almost a non-event in a way. So that's the difference between retail and commercial.
All right, I'm going to throw another spanner in the works here.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, so let's say they were tapped out. The person's tapped out. Or no, they're not. Let's say they want to do property development and they have some equity in their PPR. PPOR. I always say PPR.
Yeah.
Is it PPR? I always say PPR. A lot of people say PPOR. What is it?
Principal place of residence.
We're supposed to say
PPR.
PPR. I always say PPR. So they've got equity in their PPR, and let's say that their property is worth $1.5 million, and let's say that they owe $500,000 on that. So they have $1 million of equity. That's not usable equity, but it is equity right now. So Bob, and they don't have serviceability. How do they act? Oh no, throwing money at you.
Yeah.
How do they access some of that $1 million that's equity to go toward their property development? How do they move forward with that?
Well, serviceability is still going to be the issue there, because it's got a 99% chance it's a straight retail loan on their PPR. So
okay, because if we go retail loan, then we've got to pay interest, so we need serviceability because retail
exactly.
doesn't.
So if it's worth 1.5 and they owe a half, the question is, can they increase the debt on that property to $1 million, let's say, and pull 500 out?
Yep.
So once again, their loan now becomes $1 million. So do they have the serviceability to cope with $1 million loan?
Okay,
and they might. But then you've got to convince the bank, well, what are you going to do with the 500? Because they're really nosy.
I know. I was just refinancing something. And then, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well,
none of your bloody business.
I actually said, I don't know yet. I just want to extract it so I can do something. I actually want to do a female. Oh, can I do a plug? I want to do a female development. So if you've got some property, if you've got some money you'd like to invest, I want to put together a bit of a female syndicate. And I've got just the project. It has a great return. I haven't run it completely past you, but I would like it to be female. Just a female one would be nice.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're interested in that, flick me an email.
But you've got to be a female and you've got to have some money.
Well, God, am I even allowed to say that's probably illegal in this day and age? We've got other investments for anyone else, but I do want to do a female one. Sorry, Bob, but
it's
back to
very
you.
discriminatory.
Okay, yes, they do want to know.
I'll lodge a complaint with the discrimination ombudsman about that one.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so there's the situation though, because it is a retail loan. I mean, it used to be that you could get a line of credit on your property up to whatever you could afford, and you could sort of play with it. It's a lot harder to get just a flat line of credit these days than it used to be. So you need to shop around a bit. You need to get a good retail broker and really shop around and see, like, assuming you could service $1 million and see if they can come up with a financier. Maybe you can refinance at the interest rate that's no worse than the one you're on, but they'll actually let you tap out that other $500,000.
But Bob,
That's
what
a
if
possibility.
could you? And this came up in the live Q&A. Somebody asked that question. I liked it, so I'll ask it again. Could you get a second mortgage on
With
your
another financier.
a second like using commercial finance? So it was capitalized interest. Remember, commercial finance, you don't pay the interest; they give you the interest. Could you get a second mortgage to extract the interest?
Well, there are some second mortgage financiers that do seconds.
Mm.
There's a lot of financiers only do first mortgages.
Mm.
They don't do seconds, but there are some. I mean, there's private lenders that do seconds.
Yep.
There's some institutional lenders who do seconds. But once again, you'd have to have a deal for that money to go into, not just, we'll give you an extra $500,000 and you can go and buy
shoes.
Well, go and buy a nice Ferrari for $500,000, you know, or a couple of good pairs of shoes. So you'd need a deal that was going into.
Mm.
And then just depending on where you are, because the laws around mortgages and so forth do vary a bit from state to state.
Mm.
It's a matter of how your first mortgagee may consider you having a second mortgage. Question is, do they need to know? Do you have to tell them? Can they stop you? There's different rules.
So is that a possibility? So that you're saying it is a possibility potentially if you have $500,000 that you could extract using commercial finance as a second mortgage. That is a possibility.
It's not impossible.
It's not impossible.
No.
Wow, that's exciting.
Not many things are. But with property development, you got to come up with the equity.
Yes.
To do the development. Equity doesn't even have to be cash.
What else can it be?
Real estate.
Oh, okay.
Well,
so could you use the equity? Say you had 4 investment properties. Could you use them as equity?
You could use, if you had an unencumbered property, that's what you really want, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
You can use that as equity. So let's just say you own a $700,000 apartment somewhere with no debt. You could put that up as equity. They wouldn't give you the full $700,000 that it's worth. They might give you 70% of the 700 to pick a number. 7 sevens are 49. So a $700,000 unencumbered unit might be the equivalent of $490,000 in cash. And so they'd take a registered first mortgage over that property. They might lend you 70% against it, which would be $490,000. And that's the equivalent of having $490,000 cash.
Which is probably a deposit.
And that might do you a small project. You know, if you're thinking of projects in some places, and we have people in our program doing it, where they buy a house, cut off the backyard, build a second house, $300,000 to $400,000 will do that sort of project in a lot of places. And so in that case, that would finance that project.
So
without any cash.
That's amazing.
Well, financiers use property all the time, don't they? As cash. They lend you cash against your property. So, they don't. Second mortgages is a different ballgame, like we were just talking about. There's only a limited amount of financiers, more private people that would lend on a second mortgage, and as long as you get around the first mortgage, you're okay. You can do it because that would be capitalised. That second mortgage, you're either going to pay interest along the way, you'll pay it at the end, or in some cases with institutional second mortgages, they'll take the interest out up front. So if you were, say you wanted to borrow $500 for a year and it was 20% interest on your second, that's $100,000 interest. They might lend you the $500, but they'll take the $100 out up front and give you $4. Bless them. Or there's different ways that different second mortgage financiers use to for their second mortgages.
So I think what we're alluding to really is that there are so many different ways to do it, which leads us to why we've got the joint venture workshop, which if you didn't get your ticket already, it's too late, it's sold out. But on that weekend, we are unpacking all of those intricacies that people are unaware of. So you do know that it's possible for you, no matter what your situation, to do property development. And we talked today also in the podcast we talked on the live Q&A about the fact that there's been a little bit of softening when it comes to retail finance, meaning where it used to be, what did you say it was pre-GFC?
I'm talking about commercial finance with banks, like
Yeah.
development finance,
Yeah.
if you like, with banks. I mean, banks used to be the big lender. I think before the GFC, banks financed about 65% of developments.
Yeah.
And I can remember times in my long history where it was like 80%. But post GFC, they pulled back a fair bit and they never came into the market in a big way ever since. And a few reasons, I guess. But I mean, banks themselves make a lot of money out of their retail division, just on normal investment loans, home loans, and fees.
What fees? You always say that.
Bank
What fees?
Well, you have a look at your bank statement. There's fees everywhere. And
fees everywhere.
I've seen some of the balance sheets of banks, and they make as much out of fees as they do out of lending on the margin. Like many years ago, banks made their money by taking deposits in at I'll call it 5% and lending out at 8 or whatever it was at the time. Whereas now they make so much out of fees and they're less pushed on their margins, but they're happy with 20 or 30-year home loans, really, and that's what they like. They do have a commercial division within all the banks, but they pull back a fair bit on property development. They still lend on commercial investments, like I said, because they're a safer thing, I guess, from the bank's point of view, in that the thing already exists and there'd be tenants paying rent. But I've spoken to a couple of pretty solid brokers lately, and they said they're starting to see a bit more interest in the banks lending on commercial finance on developments. It's just it's a little crack. It's just they're thinking that their appetite is just starting to maybe. I'd want to see it happen for a while.
I actually remember, Bob, I had a conversation with somebody within the last 3 weeks and they were tapped out and they said that they weren't going to do anything until they could get bank finance again and get retail. They wanted retail finance to do development. And I said,
no chance. It was never easy getting retail, even at any point in my 40 years.
But they were a property investor, so he.
Well, they'll wait. They'll never do a development.
Yeah, I said to him,
miss out on millions of dollars.
That's kind of what I was saying to him. I said, he said, the interest is too high. And I said, it's cheaper than doing nothing. That's what I actually said to him. I'm generally not that cheeky, but sometimes when you need to be really obvious to someone, when they say the interest will be too high if you do commercial finance.
It's always too high.
95% of people are using commercial finance. So, if you do nothing, then that interest is way higher.
Retail banks don't like lending on property development.
Although you have just had a little bit of...
That's on commercial, though.
Oh, on commercial.
Not retail.
Oh, right.
Yeah, retail banks don't like it. They lend at a lower interest rate for a long period of time. That's how they make their money. They make nothing if they lend at that same low interest rate for a short period of time. They probably lose money on a 12-month loan. That's why they have a commercial division that charges something as an application fee and charges a higher interest.
So, Bob, if you were to give somebody some advice right now, if they were thinking, I'd like to do property development and I need to get some equity from my house and understand how I could do property development, what would be your advice to them?
Well, you're either going to use your own resources or you're going to use somebody else's resources.
Oh, we'd even open that can of worms. The person that could be working alongside you could be tapping into their PPOR, their usable equity.
However they get money.
Yeah, the same way as we were just talking about you getting it as an opportunity for somebody else as well.
Yeah. So the point is, can you afford to do a property development yourself? Do you have enough equity? Remember, serviceability, we can get around that. Do you have enough equity to do a property development? And if you do, fine. But if you don't have enough equity, the money has to come from somewhere. Banks only lend to a certain level. You have to put a certain amount of money in up front yourself and they'll lend the rest. And they're pretty generous. They'll lend, 70% or whatever else you need, 75 some cases. So where's that money come from? Well, if you don't have it, it's still got to come from somewhere. So it has to come from someone else, namely an investor. And, of course, that's what that's what our weekend's around. And there's so many different ways of structuring deals with investors.
Mm.
So it's either going to be your money or someone else's. If it's your money, where's it coming from? How much cash do you have? Do you have equity in your own home or other properties that you can access? It's got to come from somewhere.
And if it's not you, then that's your investor could be doing this, looking at money the same way.
Investors could have anything. They could have cash in the bank. They could have a line of credit. They could have a redraw.
Unencumbered property.
They could have an unencumbered property. I mean, it could come from anywhere. In certain structures as well, and depending on how it's structured, they could have self-managed super fund money that they could lend even. So it's just that if you don't have it yourself, it's got to come from someone else. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, I'm going to spend 2 days talking about how you do that, and there's a whole range of ways of doing it, which we teach. I mean, we teach that in our courses.
Of course. And there are, in the online course, there are creative strategies that you can watch. It's just cool that we're going to unpack it for 2 full days. I'm actually looking forward to it as well, because it's quite a fun subject. And it's a great thing to learn. I'll enjoy going over. I mean, I know my segment of it, but sometimes when it comes to the structures and stuff, I need to kind of re-go over that stuff.
We'll have our structure expert there as well.
Yeah, so there's different ways to structure things. But what we want you to know is that it is possible for anybody. And so many people we know do it, and every way that it's done is different. Even the way we do stuff, there's not one way is the same. There's always different ways of doing things. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to do property development, the only thing stopping you is you. So you know what I say? CBA, clarity, belief, action.
Oh, there you go.
Do you need clarity
You're on
around
your wagon?
Do you need clarity around what you want to do? Do you need to believe that it's possible for you? Or do you need to start taking action? Or do you need a little bit in all of those camps?
Need a bit of help.
Yeah, well, there you go. Or do you need a bit of help? But I'll just reiterate on the whole female thing. If you are a female with some money, maybe $250 would be the amounts I'd put together. I'm thinking about putting together, I've got a pretty good deal that could be done in a
project.
Yeah, it's a project. It's ready to go pretty much.
Profitable project.
It is profitable. I would just really like to put a female one together. I have reached out to a few females recently and had a few people reply. So, but if you're keen, let me know. Reach out. You've got my email address at the bottom, or anyone can find me. Property Mastermind, email admin. Anyway, Bob, thanks so much.
Good fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for unpacking that. And I know we allude to it so many times, but it's a conversation I have so often. So maybe we see it in a way today that you understood it just that wee bit better.
Okay.
All righty. Well, thanks, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.